Hello and welcome to the Friday show of The Hash. I am Zack, Seward, and I am introducing this thing. We're going to start off with Naomi Brockwell with the top story of the day. What do you got?
Absolutely. So, big news out of Bank of America, which is the second largest bank in the US. Apparently, clients there are in the process of being set up with Bitcoin futures trading. Some are apparently already live. This is a scoop. It hasn't really been announced yet, but they are delving into this world of Bitcoin futures. They're going to be cash settled, some really interesting details there, but I'm going to throw it straight to the group. In fact, I might throw straight back to you, Zach. What do you think about this? Is this, I know in previous shows we were wondering about the future of institutional players getting involved because of this lull. Does this mean that they're going to be, more hesitant to get involved? But it seems like Bank of America is diving right in. So what does this mean?
Yeah, that's right. So sources tell CoinDesk this morning that Bank of America is doing this thing despite the price lull in Bitcoin. Lately, they're still doing this. It's futures, right? So you can express your opinion on where you think the market is going. It's something that other big banking institutions have delved into as well. But it is interesting that we're not seeing the institutional momentum necessarily slow down. The fact that this is coming out when it's coming out suggests that other people are still kicking the tires, doing the due diligence on this, and rolling out products that can serve their clients. So that's my sort of top line takeaway on this. Interesting to see it come out again as the market has sort of cooled off from those $60,000 highs some months ago. So the fact that these products still are hitting the market is quite notable. Shows a little bit of resiliency, I think, in the institutional push around Bitcoin. That's my top line idea here. David, do you have thoughts on this one? I mean, I know the institutional narrative has been a big one in the last few months. What's your take on Bank of America coming into the space?
It's a little bit of a weird thought, but the thing that occurs to me first is obviously futures trading is easily accessible on platforms like Coinbase Pro, I think, and Binance and other things like that. But as far as mainstream institutions, I'm not sure how widespread futures trading is. And so it's interesting that this comes online for some potentially very high volume, high dollar players at a moment when you can, maybe plausibly short Bitcoin. So that I think is a particularly interesting moment for this to appear, to present a new option for people. And, I don't know what that means for the market, but it does potentially add a major new dynamic if you have this entirely new set of people who suddenly have the ability to short the coin at a moment when the market is in a lull.
Yeah, I'll jump back in there. It's interesting that they have been pretty conservative about this in the past. They have taken their time. We have seen other institutional players dive in before them. But apparently, due to the large amount of margin that's required to trade futures, they're feeling safe that is enough to make it less risky for them. And so they're willing to dive in, which is interesting. And I wonder if this is going to be rolled out to everyone or whether it's just going to be the wealthy clients. I know that a lot of institutional players have gone that route. They've kind of segmented their clientele, say you can trade these things, you cannot. So I wonder if they're going to be doing that. Just a reminder, if you are not part of the privileged class of people at Bank of America, you can trade Bitcoin outside of Bank of America. Just remember that there are no barriers to entry to this. But Jen, what are your thoughts on this? And what does this say about, the future of Bitcoin if the banks are coming in? Are they just lagging indicators? And is this, are we still headed for more of a bear market, or is this kind of bullish news that more people are still interested in this?
I think this just says that more people are still interested in this. I think there's still client demand. I know on this show before we've spoken about institutional interest in 2017, that kind of like there's a lot of research and hustle and bustle and a lot of offering, and then that kind of fell away in 2018. And we haven't really seen that this time around. It looks like the institutional players are still doing their research, they're still doing their due diligence. Clients are still looking for this. So I think it's a great sign for Bitcoin. I think although we're seeing a lull in price, people are really starting to understand how Bitcoin can inform the future. So this is just great news. But Ben, I'll pass it off to you for your thoughts.
Sure. I always think about these things in relation to kind of talking about, institutional investors coming into a so-called bearish market in some ways. Like, they didn't just flip a switch and turn this on. I'm wondering if they started this process when we were at those 60,000 sort of price points and are now kind of rolling it out as they take time to develop these things. So, they could be trying to cash in on that wave, and then now they're just kind of rolling out a predetermined product in a lot of ways. And I don't think this is going to be coming to like your kind of retail user in some ways of BOA or just like your everyday person. I think this is something that's going to be segmented for some of the higher end users. That's really how a lot of these banking systems work for the most part. And it's something we're seeing across the board, right? And I also think that, I'm really kind of trying not to read any of this as bullish or bearish. Like, the market seems to have settled at a certain point right now. And we're kind of hanging out in this 30,000 to 35,000 sort of area. And like, I don't think we were going to see the gains that we saw with it kind of peaking at 60,000, like going on indefinitely, right? But we're also seeing not crashing down to like, the 2017 levels in some ways. So I just think we're going to hang out here for a bit. I think that we're seeing the VC funding, we're seeing retail, we're seeing institutional investors really get into it. And we're seeing it start to settle out as an actual mechanism, not just a store of value, but something that everybody is starting to use and dabble in certain ways. So like, I think the market's going to stop swinging as much as we might be, kind of acclimated to with crypto, just because, it's starting to act, kind of untethered from the certain things or narratives that we really chose to at one point. But Zach, I'll toss it back up to you. I saw your hand.
Yeah, we can move on. I don't have a ton to say. There's a lot of good stuff to say about Binance. So
just kidding. I'm taking that one right back.
Just kidding. Thanks, Ben. God. All right, let's do Binance. Who's up?
All right, so we're moving into the world of regulation. So Binance has announced that stock tokens will be unavailable for purchase on its website effective immediately. The exchange said it's stopping support for purchasing tokenized stocks just 3 months after launching the product. In an announcement, they said the decision was made so that they can focus on other products. Now, this comes amongst news that Hong Kong is the latest jurisdiction to warn the exchange about its operations, specifically raising concerns about stock tokens. So Naomi, I'm going to kick this off to you. Just 3 months ago, we were all very excited about this new offering. 3 months later, Binance is in regulatory trouble. It seems like all over the world, and tokenized stocks have come to an end on the platform. What do you take away from this?
Well, I think it's important to keep in mind that Binance isn't pulling this product because people didn't want it. They're not pulling this product because it's not a good product or it's not interesting. They're pulling it because governments around the world are like banning Binance, and they're not even banning their particular, stock offerings. They're saying, actually, Binance itself isn't regulated. We've decided, and it just goes to show you, Binance has been pushing the boundaries of what they can get away with in terms of, this jurisdictional arbitrage. They've been really, moving this crypto horizon and opening the gateways to a lot of people. And they've been pressing a lot of buttons, and it seems that offering synthetic stock options was just one button too many, and this was the one that just caused the bucket to overflow. So I think that has caused a lot of governments to scrutinize them more closely. And, you had the UK turn around and say, well, no, you're not licensed at all, and you need certain licenses that we haven't approved you for, so we're shutting the whole thing down. CZ responded and said, no, actually, you're just referring to markets, which is these synthetic stock options. That's the thing. But, you've shut down everything. You've issued warnings about it all, but, this is an incorrect understanding of how the platform works. But it doesn't matter. It just goes to show you that even if Binance toes the line in all the other areas, these governments are going to be using the leverage that they have to, basically force them into compliance, and not just by shutting down the things that they don't have license for, but just saying, okay, if you don't comply and, just offer things that we think people around the world should have access to, we're going to just shut you down entirely. We're going to issue warnings. We're going to say you can no longer offer services to people in our jurisdictions. I think it's super sad. And I think that if nothing else, it just signals how much we need decentralized exchanges that can't be shut down. And that's really my biggest takeaway from this. But Ben, I'll throw it down to you.
Yeah, I think I was really interested in this in a variety of ways. We're seeing sort of Binance continue to experiment. We're seeing regulators react accordingly because sometimes experiment happens a little bit too fast. I can't say I'm super surprised. Like, we heard inklings of this earlier in terms of regulators looking closely at this and trying to understand it. And Binance was working with them. They were open about this aspect. What I think is curious too is maybe the sort of tail end of the article on the stoppage of the issuance of stock tokens is that people in the European economic arena and like Switzerland can migrate these stocks that they own to a new platform that their sort of German partners seemingly building out. So this isn't going away per se. And I think that's really interesting. It's like, where are these being supported? Who's going to have access to them? And it seems like they're going to continue to exist in some way, shape, or form. And I think that's actually pretty interesting, because my first question was, okay, well, what happens if you purchased a bunch of this, right? Like, are you going to, just have it taken away? Like, can you cash out? Like, what's the deal here? But it seems like another platform is being built to support these things, albeit, on the German side. So that is going to be interesting for me to watch, because it shows this isn't going away entirely, despite it being a much, lower scale of who could actually have access to it.
I have a quick question. You guys are using the term synthetic, but are these tokenized? They actually did have the stock, right?
Yeah, these are tokenized stocks. Yeah. These are tokenized stocks. They had a broker. There is a synthetic thing in the Terra ecosystem where you can get actually synthetic versions of popular stocks. But this one did have an intermediary that was actually doing the and synthetics itself. This one, there was a firm that was actually providing the stocks on the back end. But back to you, David.
It's a fascinating discussion later. My only thought on this, it's really interesting that the Hong Kong warning came when it did, and then this happened, because I wrote about this a little bit. Hong Kong, obviously a huge financial center, but they are kind of facing down growing problems because of Chinese political control. And so, this is pure speculation, but I do wonder, because BINANCE is not a Chinese company, but it's kind of a Chinese company and a little bit vulnerable to pressure from them. So I wonder if this might have had some connection to a specific defense of Hong Kong financial markets. That's pure speculation, but interesting coincidence.
All right, we are going to take a break, folks. When we get back from this break, we are going to go to Cuba. We're going to talk about the protests in Cuba and how some are supporting those efforts with crypto donations. Stick with us. It's The Hash. Happy Friday.
And welcome back to The Hash, where we discuss the latest and greatest in crypto news. So I've got a story today, and it's about the payment services company Square opening a new business focused on creating an open developer platform to make it easier to provide non-custodial, decentralized financial services. This came from a series of tweets by Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey and co-founder. And I mean, as with all tweets, these were a little bit lacking in context, but this is an interesting development in the sense that it continues to show that, Square is building out all of these services. I also think it's interesting that Dorsey is still sort of like the CEO of Twitter, but I think Square is doing much more interesting stuff in a variety of ways. But David, what are your initial thoughts on this one in terms of, this is separate from Square Crypto. This is going to be kind of self-directed and funded. But what do you think this could mean? Let's get some unhealthy speculation going in the chat.
Yeah, I mean, this is super interesting and super exciting. I will say very briefly, Twitter has been on a tear lately. They're introducing a lot of features, so just in their defense. But
not fleets.
So the key takeaway, right? I mean, they're focusing on what they want to build. So the interesting thing here is that he's talking about building. What people took away from this is that he's talking about building DeFi on Bitcoin, which, there's a lot of missing pieces. We don't know a ton right now. I think the tweets are pretty much all we have, other than somebody whose name I'm forgetting has been named as CEO of the new project. I apologize. But that's the interesting part, is why do this on Bitcoin when DeFi and Ethereum is already such a huge deal? And we know Jack has been a big supporter of Lightning. So my guess would be this somehow is going to connect to Lightning by design. I just got something in my head here, but so
that was the voice of God.
Mike
that was the voice of God.
Yeah.
I think actually it was Jack Dorsey.
That was that helpful fairy in our ears just telling us exactly.
Okay, you're going to laugh because I thought I was being told that my mic was broken. But Mike Brock is the
broken mic is not heading up the project. Let's just be clear.
Wow, roasted.
So there we go. So that's about all the information we have. But so it's going to be DeFi on Bitcoin. It is very importantly going to be open access. And so it's true DeFi, at least according to the description. So I think it's really exciting and interesting. I will say the one shocking thing to me is that people are not seeing this as exciting as it seems to me. Bitcoin isn't making any big moves when, based on fundamentals, this kind of announcement would seem to suggest that there should be some renewed interest. So it's a bit of a bummer that that's not happening. But
yeah, I'll jump in. I think that it's really interesting that Jack Dorsey really is going all out in this decentralized direction. And it seems to be this kind of recent thing over the past year or so. And it's not just on Square, it's also on Twitter. I mean, they're experimenting with this decentralized Twitter that they're hoping to build out and allow other people to plug in. And, although that hasn't really gone anywhere, it's still something that he's talked about. And, he talks about the ability for these centralized platforms to, censor all this. He basically said previously in a congressional hearing, I don't think we should have this power. I don't think I should have this power. I don't think you should have this power. Let's create these permissionless systems. And now he's applying this into the payments sector as well. I just think it's kind of really interesting. I wonder whether Bitcoin has kind of radicalized him to this more decentralized ethos, because it did start to become evident in his rhetoric when he really jumped on board the Bitcoin bandwagon. But Zach, I saw your hand go up, so I'll throw to you first.
I will defer to Jen. Jen, go for it, and I'll jump in after.
Okay, I'm going to be super quick. It just seems like there's announcement after announcement after announcement, and the information is so vague. I just want more information on just one project, the hardware wallets, this one, something, the Bitcoin fund in Africa with Jay-Z. And on that point, Ben, did this article say that Tidal was involved somehow? And what could that mean? Because I know Tidal as a music streaming platform, and how does that all kind of fit together?
I mean, it's gonna be weird in that regard, right? We've seen like sort of the decentralized answers of Spotify, obviously like sort of creators and artists and musicians and everything else. Like there has been a lot of play in the blockchain space in terms of getting people the money that they're actually owed rather than being done through centralized, entities. I don't exactly know how Tidal will be involved here. I cannot answer that one. I do not have that information, but that was maybe my initial thoughts in this regard. And also like how Tidal and those services might be integrated into something potentially along these lines in terms of more open source, more open, and also potentially remittances for artists. But Zach, I'm going to toss it back down to you.
Yeah, so I read this tweet and I was like, yeah, this isn't really like DeFi, like as we're thinking about it. It's like decentralized financial services, right? It's not like DeFi services. That was just my interpretation of the Jack tweet. So I would hope that's the case, because I'm pretty bearish on the idea of Bitcoin supporting DeFi at present when there are far better options for doing so on other networks, be they Ethereum or some of these other competing proof of stake networks that are already up and running. So I would hope that this isn't like Maxi is going to maxi and like try to put DeFi on Bitcoin, but it's basically saying, hey, we can build services that are on top of Bitcoin that are decentralized, and they're also financial services, but they're not DeFi services in the way that we're thinking about them. I know that some people are trying to build services, be it sovereign or other, but Bitcoin DeFi to me is still pretty pie in the sky. I'll kick it to you, Naomi, before we change gears. So what do you got?
Yeah, I mean, on that note, I think it's interesting to mention the fact that DeFi isn't really a thing on Bitcoin, and maybe he is trying to encourage this by creating this specifically developer platform. The whole goal is to allow people to build applications on there, to provide, whether it's like an API that has a bunch of financial data that Square has access to, and they're going to find a way to make it easier for other people to plug into this in order to experiment. I think that's kind of cool, because the more people who experiment in this payment services space and in this DeFi space, I think the better off we're going to be, because we're just going to have lots of different options. So I think it's kind of interesting, and I'm looking forward to seeing what actually happens there, whether it's just going to be more announcements and less information, or whether we're going to start to see things. But definitely keeping my eye on this. But let's change topic here. Zach, I'm going to throw it back to you.
Yes, let's go to... What's up? Talk to me.
Never mind.
Talk to me, baby. Is Steve?
I thought it was my turn. I got
Is
in
this
line.
Steve? Is baby Steve coming
Got
on?
excited.
Trying to jump there.
All
All
right.
right, Zach, back to you.
Back to me. Take two. Let's go to
Take
Open
two.
Bazaar. Open Bazaar was sort of an early OG in e-commerce with Bitcoin, and Open Bazaar closed not long ago. And our colleague Mark Hochstein had a really interesting conversation with its founder as to why he thought it didn't work out. And there's a lot of interesting nuggets in here. We could go all sorts of numbers of ways. One of the things that he mentioned that I thought was really interesting was, again, the prevalence of Bitcoin as an asset, as a store of value, rather than what it had originally been intended to be, that peer-to-peer electronic payment system. A lot of good nuggets in here. I think we could go all sorts of ways with this, but Open Bazaar is certainly an OG in the decentralized e-commerce space, and it just didn't work out. I think there's a number of reasons for that. So I just wanted to open up a conversation around what ends up being a really insightful piece on a project that just was either too early or couldn't quite find product market fit. I'm going to toss this to Naomi for a little bit of the backstory on Open Bazaar. I think it was founded in 2014, really with this idea of providing commerce on the internet without a centralized intermediary, which is a noble aim, but it just didn't click. What's your take on Open Bazaar, whether it's this piece or your past experience with that platform?
Yeah, so Open Bazaar was awesome. And I think that a decentralized marketplace is definitely needed in the world. This kind of came off the heels of Silk Road getting shut down. And I know that Brian Hoffman's really distanced himself from the idea that, there's anything illicit going on here. The way they did this was, they had this permissionless structure underneath the hood, but basically they didn't index illicit goods. So you couldn't search for them, but you could still, use Open Bazaar to trade them. And it's sort of the way that a lot of these permissionless platforms work. Even like Google searches, right? Google just doesn't index something. It doesn't mean that it doesn't exist on the internet. There are just other ways to get to it. And so it was super cool. I had an account on there. I was selling goods and things on there. And I loved the idea. It really didn't take off at all. Why are you guys giggling? You guys are always giggling.
I want to know what it was. What was the things?
I've just I've got John Mulaney in my head. It's like goods and or services. Like
I was selling, I have a children's book I wrote back in 2015. So I was selling that. I was selling some merchandise and stuff. I just loved the idea of supporting the people who are building out our decentralized future. And marketplaces are a huge part of that. I don't like them being controlled. And so I wanted to support the people who are, trying to build out options and alternatives for people. What was interesting, though, on the site was that it was kind of, there was some bugs in there. Bitcoin payments didn't work well on there. They had other payments. I think that, I'm good friends with the former lead developer there. I believe that they were trying to, focus on other stuff, but then Ethereum kind of became a focus that they were kind of put in. And honestly, I just don't think that the world was ready for it. We're only now starting to see this explosion of DeFi and people starting to talk about why decentralized things are important. This was 2014 that they started this and tried for a long time to really get movement around this. But I think they were just too early. I don't think that decentralized marketplaces are dead. I would love to see them try again. I want to see them try basing it on Zcash or something. I understand that there are, difficult things associated with adding Zcash, but I want to see them try. I think that would be so awesome and so needed. I just think that they were too early. And I loved them. I was super sad when I saw them go down. And honestly, it was kind of expected because they never had a monetization model. And I know they explored for a little while, maybe they were going to create their own token. They never took a percentage of trades or anything. So there was always a question in my back of my mind where I'm like, how are these VCs going to be making back their money on this? It seems that, they just never got there because I think they were hoping to see a lot more people flocking to the website, and that just never came. But yeah, looking forward to the future. Come on, Open Bazaar team. I want to see what you've got next, because I do think decentralization and decentralized markets will be a big part of our future. But Ben, I'm going to throw this to you.
Yeah, sure. I think this is also a nice little tidy reminder that all the A16Z touches is not made of gold. They were one of the VCs that were backing this. And I do think projects can also die, and that can be okay, I think, in my mind. I think it's really instructive when we look back at how things are built and then where they kind of fail. We were talking about like peer-to-peer Tor relays in this and building systems for Bitcoin payments and also working on a desktop and a mobile app and talking to tech people and everything else. I kind of like put my product manager hat on, and you look at this and you're like, okay, there was just a lot going on. And when you're trying to build it from the ground up without that central intermediary, like they're even trying to do like certain search engine stuff and things like that. And then you have to index information, and it gets really hard, really, really fast. And, aside from it being a little bit before the time, I think it's sort of instructive that we've not seen an immediate sort of competitor pop up or a replacement pop up. Maybe there isn't quite the market for it just yet. I think there's a lot of lessons to take away from this. And I think that, this is going to continue to happen in the decentralized space more and more. It's like, we're going to see projects live, we're going to see projects die. And I think that is okay because we learn something each time. And sort of maybe to Jen, when talking about Jack's tweets, right? We want more information. Like sometimes you get a lot of information from what doesn't work. And then, there's going to be more VC funding out there. There's going to be more projects and, try again.
Yeah, I just want to add before we wrap up is we could actually learn a lot from Library on this, right? Because Library had this clunky peer-to-peer app that people were like, I don't really understand what an app is. I use websites. And then it wasn't until they built Odyssey and Library.tv that people started flocking to the network. I think if OpenBazaar had a P2P app, but also had this, centralized website functionality as well, I think a lot more people would have flocked there because it's just something they're more comfortable with. Because I think that you do need two parts. You need the real decentralized infrastructure and the peer-to-peer optionality for those who are really hardcore about this, but then add like a really easy way for other people who may not have decentralization as their primary goal, add a way for them to get involved. So that was something that I think would have been really cool. But let's change track here. And David, now we are throwing to you.
Yes. Sorry about that. So we have a story here, relatively small little example, but some activists in Cuba are accepting crypto payments, and a lot of them seem to be coming from within Cuba, but some also from outside. It is just a kind of little tiny case. Apparently, they've only raised a few $1,000s, but it's for some of the areas of the country that are being really hit by the coronavirus crisis. And the situation here, the context is a little bit maybe more interesting than the case itself, which on the one hand, you have, of course, really strong U.S. sanctions against Cuba, which also include sanctions on moving money. Wells Fargo actually shut down remittances to Cuba last November. And Cuba, like many countries in the Caribbean and South America, is extremely reliant on remittances from abroad. So that's a big deal. On the other hand, right now, you have a lot of unrest in Cuba, basically linked to dissatisfaction over the country or the government's handling of COVID. And Cuba, of course, has a really bad human rights record, which includes detaining people and silencing journalists. And they have also put some restrictions on money movements, although those do seem linked to U.S. Sanctions. So I think what you have is kind of a two-sided deadlock situation where the availability of an option, at least on the finance side, to get through the blockades and through the barriers that have been set up by governments so that people can directly connect and help each other out is really interesting and kind of a small little vision of the beautiful crypto future that we all imagine. So it's a very interesting case. Obviously, a lot of political implications too, but hopefully actually helping Cubans. I don't know if anybody wants to chime in and follow up and what they see as interesting.
What's happening in Cuba is obviously not ideal, but reading this story made me just feel really happy for the future of crypto. Here we see crypto being used in a case in its ultimate use case, and the story spoke about Cubans teaching other Cubans how to use crypto, how to set up wallets, and how to send crypto to the areas of Cuba that need it the most. And when we think about mainstream adoption, that's really, really what we want. It's all teaching other people who need crypto, who need it for remittances, who need it to send money to places that are in need. That for me speaks to like the ultimate mainstream adoption. Am I frozen?
You're
not frozen.
You're going in and out though. You got some auto tune going on a little bit. No, I think this is interesting in a few ways, and it particularly is kind of Particularly they're kind of butting up too against like the internet throttling and shutting down that's happening in light of the protests in some ways, as well as unfortunately spontaneous power outages. Like I'm curious to see how that might impact some of these use cases, because I think like when we talk about crypto, when we talk about remittances and stuff like that, we sort of assume there's some ability in that regard. So how that reality really confronts with this sort of crypto, idea that we're talking about, I'm curious to see if there's more friction there in some ways. But I do think this is interesting. I do think, we're seeing this used yet again as a way to get around some sanctions that are being levied, as a way to get around sort of the geopolitical controversies and powers that be in this regard. And this is always what I'm interested in, is like how people are actually using this on the ground, not sort of like, we talk about Bitcoin as a store of value, right? But it's way more interesting to me when it's actually used in situations that are, a lot more volatile than some of the institutional investors, for example, that we talk about quite often on this show. So this is just yet another one. We've seen this happen in Nigeria. We've seen this happen in a number of other countries like Belarus when things get really dicey on the ground. And so we'll see if it gains more traction. But again, I do know that, again, internet throttling, power outages, that's a reality that it's going to come into conflict with at some point. But Naomi, I'm tossing it to you.
Yeah, it's super interesting. Talking about how it's actually used on the ground, that's what's most fascinating to me as well. And you've got similar situation happening in Venezuela as well, where crypto is really a lifeline for people there. And I interviewed a couple of Venezuelans who fled the country between like a year to a year and a half ago last week. And it's just super interesting because we hear these reports about like, oh yeah, it's being used in these countries. It's helpful. But like when you actually hear it from these people and they say like, yeah, everyone I know is like buying Bitcoin and trying to store their value in it. And, they're buying things with other cryptocurrencies like Dash, Bitcoin Cash. Like it makes you feel great that we've created something that does give people more freedom across the world, regardless of what's happening with the governments there. And that's just super exciting. But Zach, let's wrap this thing.
Let's wrap this thing. Let's shut it down. Thanks, guys.
Like a synthetic stock.
Let's shut it down like a Binance tokenized stock, and we'll call it a day. This has been a presentation of The Hash. Thanks for tuning with us. This is Friday. You're going to have a great weekend. So are we. We'll be back on Monday to talk about more great stuff. I'm Zach. We got Naomi, Jen, Ben, and David. Thanks so much. We hope you have a lovely weekend, and we'll see you soon. Thanks so much. We'll see you again. Bye.
Thanks someday.
Bye.